you've never been loved the way you love. And she says, I'm here to teach you how to love. And I'm like, whoa. And so she's like, reverse the feeling. When you give love out, feel it coming back. And that was one of the things that why I really got into Reiki was because to give a healing, you get a healing.
Okay, I'm so happy to have with us today Rod Lyman, but you're a fellow healer friend of mine. And
Hmm.
so I thought it would be really great to talk today about my latest inspiration that I had on Christmas morning. I was on my hike, and just what flew into my mind was be free in 2023, cure mental illness. And obviously in this line of work, I'm a relational soul coach and you do Reiki healing.
I'm medical intuitive, Reiki healer, spiritual
Okay.
teacher. The list goes on and on. NLP, life coach, therapist, whatever you want to call me. I'm
Okay.
just Rod.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm sure, you're in this healing field and, um, this time of year can bring about more mental illness, more diseased thoughts. I like to call it, untrue thoughts in the head that you start believing and listening to, and then guiding your life by those untrue thoughts.
Yep.
And things can go really awry from there. And I just felt such inspiration and such energy flowing through me to just say out loud mental illness can be cured.
Yep.
We can cure it. And it's a journey. For some people it's going to be longer. For some people it's going to be shorter. I was on that journey. I have cured mental illness. And I just thought it would be, a good time to talk about it. Also, in light of, did you know the celebrity Twitch?
Yep.
Did,
Yes, I did. Absolutely.
yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe shed some light on that too, because I think that's been a struggle for me and just a lot of people
Right.
making sense of that. And then where can we go from here? But you also shared when I reached out to you that you've lost a few friends recently
Yep.
to suicide.
Yep.
And you're a pro at this, so let's just start sharing, what's going on for you? How are you
Pro
handling this?
pro is not the really word, when it comes to suicide. It's just you never know. And that's the biggest thing is you don't have any clue what's gonna come up and happen. One of my dear friends, he contacted me before Christmas and asked me what I was doing, and I asked him what he was going to do, and he no indication, none whatsoever. I mean, it sounds like that's the same thing with Twitch and everything else. The clients that I've been losing this last year, a lot of them have to do with I work with a majority amount of cancer patients. And a lot of them just don't see a way out. And so they kind of let themselves out of this world and let themselves go and that and it's not the common things that you look for anymore, like them having a plan or them having a whole discussion or even a letter written or anything else that you don't know from day to day. And I think that's what has been happening this whole last year is that you see a lot of peaks and valleys. And, you know, one day somebody's up, the next day that they're down, and you really have no idea. And I used to go through the waves. I mean, had these waves horribly, where it hit you hard, where it almost bring you down to your knees. But I never wanted to think of, just going away. I guess my belief system always has been that if we kill ourselves or we commit suicide or whatever else, and that we have to come back and relive this whole life over again. And that's just a theory I have. And that's a kind of an idealism that I don't really ever want to do that. I would never want to do that. And my clients that that go through this that figure they can redo this a different way, and I'm not a fan of that. That's for sure. And
That's interesting how your belief is part of what keeps you here focused doing what you're doing.
absolutely, absolutely. I didn't choose to do what I do. It was chosen for me. And I mean, I've been uh, computer wizard. I taught computer schools, I classes, and everything else. And that's not where my life led me to. And every time I thought I was getting into this spiritual world, it would change on me, and something else would change. And so I ended up, for my mom, she wanted me to become a minister, so I went up back to school to get my PhD in theology. And that's when I really started discovering who I was in the spiritual world. And I started having my own belief systems instead of having belief systems of other people's. And I don't know, have you ever heard of the the ominous?
No.
So ominous is was coined a while back by Alice Bailey, and she coined it as an omnist is a person that believes in all religions and believes that all religions have a piece of every part. So ever since I got into that, I was in theology school when I actually learned that. And I actually sat down and talked to my professor about it. And, they're kind of Christian based,
Mm.
and so their Christian base did not really believe in Taoism and Buddha and everything else in that. But I did find an instructor that did believe in that. And once I got involved with him, I excelled. I mean, that's when I start realizing life is not what we thought it was. I had a theory when I was 13 years old that I told my minister, that I told him that I said, "Hey, I don't believe that the whole flood thing and the Noah's Ark and everything else. That I says I believe there was one, but I says I don't believe they had animals on it. I believe they carried DNA." And so when they cleaned and cleansed this world, that I believe the Noah's Ark thing was just a carrier of DNA, and that's what they called it, Noah's Ark, because they removed all the DNA of of the animals, and then after the cleansing of the flood, they repopulated everything with the DNA. So it's I had these different thoughts and everything else in that in this lifetime and that. So same thing as that. My belief was that we were in a gaff up in the world, and part of the gaft in some religions like Buddha and Taoism believe that the gaft is where we create our future. We create contracts with other people and everything else, and this is partly what my belief of this was: the contracts that we are making with each other. And we make contracts with the world all the time. And so that's how I come into the suicide thing and everything else. And that was that there's always this contract that we make. And sometimes we want to get out of a contract and we rip the contract up. And then that's when we decide that this isn't what we want anymore in this world. But now it's the plan of I'm on the other side going, how can I help these people? And what can I do for these people? And one of my biggest thing is that teach them that they're very special. Everybody has something that's special about them. Everybody believes in that they have a speciality, and I believe that too. And I mean, just like you, is like I never look at somebody's outside appearance and that really. I always look at the inside, and I look through the eyes, I look through the heart, and everything else, and that's when I get to recognize and realize what a type of person they are. I walk around going, I don't like people. I've never liked people. I love souls though. I love people's souls, and I love working with people's souls and everything else. And if we take the soul practice of this whole thing and start realizing this is more than we thought it was going to be, it has become a bigger adventure for most of us in that in some aspect. And a lot of us want to just see how it's going to play out, but a lot of people say they want to check out early. And I'm blaming it on the right now the universe is going through changes itself, and I think this is a lot of people are ready to get off the boat.
Yeah, there's a lot to speak to with what you just shared. So I write down notes while we talk.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to back up. I think it's interesting in your theology school, finding someone that you could relate to. I just purchased a huge book on mythology because just in my own research, and I have learned some Buddhism. I was raised Christian. And when I learned the teachings of Buddha, I'm just looking at them saying, this is Jesus' teachings. And so I wanted to understand, were there more mythologies that had similar stories, like, the flood? There's all kinds of stories in mythology, but I was wondering if there were similar stories in our ancient history with, the stories in the Bible.
Absolutely.
There are. It's almost like
It's
repeated over and over again. So I was curious to ask you, when you're getting this degree in theology, I'm sure you brought this up to some of the professors. What was their response to the glaring resemblances in stories?
so it's thank you. That's very interesting because that's something that I struggled with a lot is because Greek mythology is one of the things that is actually older than Christianity. And you look at Greek mythology, Zeus and Hercules. Zeus is the god, powerful god, where Hercules is the son of Zeus, and that which is God in Jesus in a sense. Okay, and then also the mythology that Zeus had actually destroyed the earth to reclaim the earth because too many of his fallen goddesses had started dating and started going with the human beings, and they liked human women more than anything, and they were creating monsters basically. Well, part of the thing that was taken out of the Bible was the book of giants, and that's actually in other Bibles, like such as the Ethiopian Bible, which has more books than ever. But the book of giants, it comes from the fact that a Greek mythology of the gods, coming down and having sex with the female humans. Well, in the Book of Gods, it's the same thing. Is in Christianity, they believe that the fallen angels have came down here, and then this is where they get washed away and everything because they were having sex with the female. So there's a lot of things that just mesh and match with everything. It's like you know Jesus and God and Zeus and Hercules and then you could even get into Taoism and the belief of Taoism. Uh, that's even older yet, and then Buddhism. I mean, there's so much that you could get into all these isms and all these people and that and these studies and that, and you will find the equality on each one of them. And that's why I believe in omnism and being an omnist is because there is belief in everything, and it's just that the book of the Bible and that it's written by man that was channeled by men and everything else, so it's going to be interpreted by man. And you notice that there's a lot of females been taken of out of the Bible, and there's a lot that was in the Greek mythology, and there's a lot that's in Taoism, there's a lot in Buddhism, that, but Christianity seemed to take a lot of it out of there. There's also one called the Book of Mary, and that was found in the Sanskrits a while back, and not too long ago, actually, in the 1900s, they actually found the Sanskrits, and they found the Book of Mary, which is about Mary Magdalene that had written about Jesus and had been writing about all these beautiful things that Jesus has done and said and everything else, and that she was part of the apostles. And that's the interesting thing is that a lot of people think that when they see the Last Supper and that there's many familiarities that this could be a female or there could be a male that's standing next to Jesus, and people are like, I'm not sure who this or what this is, then, and it doesn't matter, right? Is Mary she comes across as compassion and love, while Jesus came across as more of a teacher in that. You'll see that in every aspect of every mythology, theology, any idealism out there. It always has a woman playing the compassionate part. Well, think of Judaism. Now, Judaism doesn't believe in the New Testament. They only believe in the Old Testament. So the theory that Jesus and Mary isn't even part of that. It's a part of a story that they have, but it's not part of the teachings. We're supposed to follow the Old Testament, not the New Testament. And most Christianity believe that we're supposed to be following the New Testament, not the Old Testament. And to me, it's just like a rewrite, you know. As we grow, there may be a New Testament. Who knows? And somebody else may be saying, "Hey, I'm channeling this," or I'm going to add to the Bible. But I think they've kind of put it into retrospect that the Bible has already been written. It's written by a God. It's been channeled by God, and you're not supposed to change any of the meaning of it. So, all theories.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've decided not to. I just don't think it's fruitful to engage in debate because, what I hear Christians say, in particular, referring to the Bible, is, why do you pick and choose what you believe? And I say, well, the people who put the Bible together picked and chose, but they believe that, well, they were inspired by God when they picked and chose what went in. And it's kind of like, well, that's pretty convenient
Right.
for
Absolutely.
people who wanted to keep their control and power. But
Right.
yeah, I find that fascinating because to me, it's just, it's so glaringly true that, well, even in Hinduism, they have Brahma. Is it
Brahma.
Brahman
Yep.
and
Brahma.
Sarasvati?
Right.
Well, that's very close to Abraham and Sarah.
Right.
I mean,
Yes. Absolutely.
it's just kind of almost laughable. It's so similar.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, when I look at what are the beliefs, and again, in reading in this mythology book, I keep reading over and over again. It says something about honoring others, honoring strangers, and just different ways of saying that. And of
Right.
course, Jesus is known for saying, love your neighbor as yourself.
Absolutely.
And like all of the commands, all the rules basically can be boiled down to love one another, love your neighbor as yourself. Like you don't need all those rules, just do this.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so love seems to be the universal message.
So and thank you, because that's where I was going to go with this, is that love is the universal message. Love is about, everything we don't understand. One of the best things if somebody's asked me is like, how do you protect yourself when you do psychic work or whatever else? And then I don't call it psychic work. I call it intuitive work. How I protect myself is I surround myself with love. Love is the most confusing thing. Nobody can get past that. So why not protect yourself with love? And I want to make sure, Kim, I want to add this to this, is that I'm not picking sides. I'm
No, me neither.
I'm a theologist. I love the study of mythology and theology. I love the study of all this and that. And I'm not picking sides. Any side somebody picks is the right side for them. Not, and it doesn't mean it has to work for me. I always tell my students at the beginning of the class is take a piece of rice bag. Okay, you know what a rice bag is, right? It's
No.
like a mesh bag, yeah.
Yeah.
And take all the information I give you and squeeze out what doesn't matter to you, and the rest of it, use the ones that matter to you. And I want to also reiterate that here is that I don't want anybody to think that's listening to this that we're this. We're not. We have no labels. I'm not labeling anything. It's just my theories and ideas and trying to help out other people. We're also trying to help people understand what love is and how love can conquer all. And love should not be compartmentalized in the heart. Just never should be compartmentalized. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody tells me hug heart to heart, and that I always get confused because I always thought as my body as the whole heart. And so when they say heart to heart, I'm confused, and then all the spontaneity is out of there. Or all of a sudden, it's like, then I don't know how to hug somebody. And like, you want me heart to heart? Where's your heart? I don't
Oh,
want to have to figure that out. I just want to hug somebody.
it's my being.
Yes, exactly. the heart to heart is my being. It doesn't have to be physical to physical, because then what we're doing is we're focusing on the physical part of that. It's like, I want to make sure the heart goes directly to your heart. And I don't want to be off sides or anything else. And so that's, when somebody tells me that, I get confused, because I'm that type of person that when they say, I would like it this way, I want to please you, but I don't know how, because I'm different. And that's that love part about growing up and being love,
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't understand what love is. And I'm going to ask you a question. Do you
yeah.
believe that a person that commits suicide loves themselves?
Their ego doesn't.
Oh, interesting. I really like that. Their ego doesn't. So if we're
Yes. So,
focusing,
yeah.
listen,
Yeah. No, I believe that you know, so basically this cure mental illness, I'm kicking it off by teaching from my workbook what is ego. Because I believe when we can understand ego, we can master ego. But when we, in that process, we learn that we truly are our higher self. I like to use it,
absolutely,
higher self, your true self. That's who you really are. But ego is just a voice in the mind.
absolutely,
So what kind of back to the suicide talk,
right,
um, I believe kind of what you were saying, that it seems to be more now than ever. Someone's having a low moment, and a low moment is ego has taken over. Ego is ruling their mind and saying, it's not worth it. Um, you're not lovable, whatever that message is. It's usually something like, you're not worth it. This is too hard. It's usually shame is in
yeah,
there. And they just felt defeated from the ego voice. And
right,
so the ego voice took up too much residence. And it's not like your higher self is always there, but if you're living a life and you're fueling egoic thoughts and egoic defenses,
right,
then, when you have a low moment, ego's going to grab that
right.
and just be like, this isn't worth it. Take yourself out. And so, I mean, when you look at someone like Twitch, who everyone said he was just love and light, and talk about when you and I were talking about how we look into people's eyes and we see their smile on his face, like he was just radiant.
Oh, absolutely.
And I read a quote where he literally said something like, I love to be unconditional love to others. And what my spirit told me was that that was actually a coping mechanism for him, because he could not give unconditional love to himself.
Right,
He could give it to others, and that's a lovely, wonderful thing, but he hadn't learned the art of giving it to himself as well.
right, absolutely.
Because that's the
100%
only
agree.
way you can take yourself out, is if you, yeah, so that's what I believe. If you don't truly understand that you are love, and
Right,
that you're not your ego, and you are not what happened to you. You are not that trauma story. You are not the horrible things that someone either did to you or even that you have done.
right,
And the beauty of the message of, let's say, Jesus is, it's, to me, it's forgiveness, self-forgiveness and forgiveness of all, like that. He just epitomized forgiveness, that you can actually be forgiveness. He's up on the cross and he said, forgive them, the people who were accusing him, the people who were spitting on him. He said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And, if we go a little woo here, I have had a visit from Jesus. I had an incredible vision with him. And he really enlightened me with what forgiveness means, and to really teach that message to the world. Like, um, when you take up your cross and follow him, we're basically getting up on the cross with him, with anybody who hurt us, and realizing anybody who causes hurt is hurt themselves.
absolutely.
Yeah, that common phrase, hurt people.
Yep,
So, yeah, so that with that common phrase, just when you can understand that, and there's a process to that. Like I always say, you can't just jump to forgiveness. Like if you're on the path, we might have to do some inner child work. We might need to have some energy clearings and healings. We might need to, not might need to, we really have to feel the feelings that we've endured, that we've suppressed, let those out, and then forgiveness can come in. And we can be like Jesus. We can literally be forgiveness. To me, he's the symbol of love and forgiveness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like getting the state of humanity. Get it, you just get it. Like I
Right.
get it now.
Right.
I get it that if anybody is supposedly causing hurt to me or harm, um, they're hurt. And so I don't have to identify with that hurt.
No.
I I can look at it and see what's going on and realize, well, I'm my higher self. My ego doesn't like it. My
Right.
ego's like, ego's going to shout out, they're bad, get revenge. Or ego, I think, also will say, well, you deserved it. You're you're not enough,
Right.
all of those messages.
Yeah, have you ever heard of the theory that the ego pushes the chakras? That the
No, I haven't. Do share.
So the backside of us is the negative ego side of us, okay? And the front side of us is the positiveness. But we have to have some ego to be able to move forward. That's the theory, okay? So the first three chakras, our base, our sacral, and our power center chakras, those are man, made from man. Okay. And Carl Jung actually is the one that actually came up with the theory that the first three chakras are the ones relationship we have with man, and the next chakras, the four chakras, are what we had with God. And that was his theory that we need to be able to meld the four top chakras with the three bottom chakras. And if you look at it that way, the triangulation. So you triangulate from this and come up, and that so now you're making a triangle up there, and then the triangulation is from downward, and if you put them together, it becomes the Star of David. And so
Oh,
and so the theory is that we should have a relationship with ourselves and others with the top four chakras and never with the bottom three chakras. We want to meld those chakras, become with God with as man, and man was as God.
mm,
And so we tried to meld those chakras together in that, but we should never have a relationship below that. Now, I hear so many people say we need to shut our chakras down every day, and everything else. That to me personally, I believe that we need to leave those chakras open because they're the whiskers of our life. Okay. And as whiskers of our life, what they're doing is they're telling us how we should feel and things like that. We run into somebody, I start talking to you. Where am I feeling it? I'm feeling it in my heart. My heart chakra tells me your heart base and your heart, everything about you is heart compassion. That, but I also can feel a little bit in my throat in that, which means that there's things that you want to say and things that there's a lot of information out there that you want to give and everything else. Then I feel it in my third eye with you, and so we're having a relationship above the diaphragm, and that means no expectations. When we
mm,
have a relationship above the diaphragm, there's no expectations. Below the diaphragm is expectations. That so if we're having if ego comes in and we're only working with the bottom three chakras only and we're pushing out, ego starts pushing out and oozing out of those the human side of us, the physical side of us. And this is the creation that we start thinking about foundation, our family. We start worrying about our family. We start thinking we're not good enough. That's ego taking over that area. Sacral area, the sexuality, creativity. We start thinking more of the sexuality part of it, and then our creativity in that. That means ego's taken over that. Our power center, we're not good enough. We've given it away. We're everything else that ego does that, and so what happens is it gets so diluted because we're not matched together from their upper chakras to our lower chakras that the delusion is coming out as being narcissistic or being rude or unkind, not having compassion. And so there's that theory that, if we work with the chakras a lot and we keep them balanced in that and pointing the same way, um, a theory that a guru once told me is he says, visualize every chakra being like a flashlight. Okay.
okay.
And when you're all in line to straighten out, you're focusing on the same thing always. But a lot of people, one person over here, his flashlight is, his flashlight's over here, up, down, and every chakra is not in line and it's pointing somewhere else because you're working on something. Each chakra is working on something different instead of working on all of it at the same time. Does that make sense? So each chakra, and then we align it, it becomes one great big beautiful light instead of 100 different lights. So that was just the theory that
Yeah,
that
I like that. I mean, for people who are new to chakras, it's great to start diving into that. Um, a term I use is just like we want all of our chakras activated and flowing, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
We're having an earth experience,
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
so
But
it would
we're
make
also,
sense.
well,
Yeah.
yep, we're also a consciousness though too. You know that.
Yes.
And they were talked about in the 70s and 80s. Berkeley came out with a study that talks about how our consciousness is, there's only two types of consciousness right now. And in the religious aspect, the Christianity aspect of it, it was the Jesus consciousness and the Mary consciousness. Okay. That was in the 70s. That was 60s, 70s, and everything else. As we start getting into the 1900s, 2000s, and that we started adding consciousness to it. In the 1900s, Pontius Pilate consciousness came out, and that was something, someone that wanted to destroy goodness and everything else in that. When we get to the 2000s and that, what happens is now we have the nulls, are the zeros. I call them the hollows, okay, but they called them the nulls. So then we have the Jesus consciousness, the Mary consciousness, Pontius Pilate consciousness, and then the nulls and the hollows. And the hollows are the ones that just hear something and that's the only thing they can focus on is what they hear. They have no consciousness of their own. It's a hollow, and they are running around listening to different consciousness and that, but they're more towards the negative consciousness than a positive consciousness. So they tend to go with the Pontius Pilate consciousness. Jesus consciousness was the teaching compassion. Mary consciousness was the compassion and love. Pontius Pilate was to tear down anything that is good, and the hollows were just to listen to whatever they wanted to believe in at the time. So it's basically somebody tells them something and then they go, well, so and so said so, so they believe that instead of using their own mind, heart, and soul. And that was the consciousness that had just came out. And they're talking, that consciousness has come out since the 2014s, 2012s, around there, that they believe that that consciousness is starting to awaken. And I believe that has to do a lot with what is going on with people that are having a hard time in this life and suicidal and everything else because of the consciousness. The consciousness now are awakening them to something different than that, and they're not really sure that you only had two consciousness at first, and now they have four consciousness they have to worry about. What other people think of them, there's a negativity, there's this, that, blah, blah, blah. And that the ego steps in and makes two more consciousness and starts tearing down the other two consciousness. Does that make sense?
Mm, lost me a little bit. So you're, you're I just wanted, so you're categorizing consciousness, or it was their way of defining what they were and who's they and what they're noticing.
Right. So they are is the study they did at Berkeley. They did
Okay.
a consciousness study, and how they did that was they brought in all these different people in that and put them into a meditative state and brought the consciousness out and asked them certain questions. And it seemed like the questions for the nulls, or the people that are the zeros, whatever they called them, the hollows, those consciousness people in that only repeated what they have heard. So they're repeating what they saw on TV or newspaper, or radio, and that. While the Pontius Pilate consciousness is like, no, that's horrible, that's bad. We don't believe in stuff like that. That's, anything good we don't believe in, basically. And then the people that have the Jesus consciousness are the ones that want to teach and help. It goes, there's something more out there than in this world. And then the Mary consciousness were the ones that have a lot of compassion and love for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. I still believe in everybody. So does that make more sense now, the consciousness?
A little bit. So they asked these people's questions to determine what their consciousness was.
Right, under in a meditative state. So they're mostly hypnotized, but in more of a meditative hypnotization than anything. And so, which they're getting the most truest answers out of that person because it's coming from
Okay.
the conscious.
But you were like saying the different eras that these consciousnesses
Right.
came.
The first two consciousness that they actually found was back in this 60s and 70s. That was the first study that they found that most people only had two consciousness.
Okay.
And then as their study grew, they do another conscious study after 5 years and another conscious study. And they're noticing that the conscious studies are actually growing instead of being the same. So most consciousness, when they first start, they believe every consciousness was like a Mary consciousness. There was a love for everything. Okay.
Yeah. I
Gratitude
guess
and love
what
for everything.
yeah. So now that I think I'm following you, I guess what's coming to me is we're kind of the age of information
Yes.
and information overload. And so I think we're putting, at least people now in this era might be putting too much emphasis or spending too much time on mind information, because you were saying how they listen and just repeat back what they've heard
Right.
rather than, maybe turn that off, put your phone away, and go within to your
Right.
heart where
Absolutely.
your Mary Jesus consciousness would be,
Right.
or the label for that.
Right.
That
And
makes
label.
sense.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you use the label thing because I'm not a label person, but they're using these labels to help other people understand what it mean. It's just compassion,
Yeah.
love, and
Labels are
peace.
helpful. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but especially when I'm coaching someone new, labels are helpful, and they were helpful for me, not to be pigeonholed by it, but to realize, oh, I'm not alone. There's
Right,
other people who feel highly sensitive, or there's other people who feel, you know, these certain defined terms or personality types or whatever it may be.
right,
It helps for those of us, like for myself, who just didn't have an identity growing up. I wasn't raised in an environment where I felt any sort of self-esteem building or
right.
emotional support. So I really didn't know who I was at all. And so it took me a long time when I became an adult to grow up, basically, and discover, you know, who I am, and, that my personality type and that I'm a sensitive is all okay and good. Because the message I was getting was like nothing,
Right, right.
like
Where'd you
literally
grow
nothing.
Where'd you grow up at?
I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota.
And I grew up in South Dakota, so
Yeah, my
yeah,
parents were just wonderful now. We've done a lot of healing, but back then, they were young parents, children of alcoholics. They
right,
just were not equipped, and some of their belief systems, were not helpful. Like,
100%.
dad didn't think it was healthy to go upstairs and do prayers and bedtime stories after a certain age, like a very young age, and like, you don't hug and you don't express emotion
Right,
and you don't say I love you because for some reason
absolutely.
that was like weak or something, or it,
Right,
it wasn't demonstrated to him.
right.
So they just hadn't experienced it. If you haven't experienced that, it's not going to be readily available to you.
Absolutely. And that's interesting because I grew up in South Dakota, but most of my family came from northern Minnesota, Black Lake, Leech Lake area up there and that. So most of my family was up in that area. And same thing is that my father at a very young age, I loved to snuggle with my father and give him a kiss before I went to bed, right? But as I got to a certain age, no, you can't do that. That's wrong, right? And all of a sudden the kissing went away and the hugging went away and the loving went away and there was no love anymore. There was not it was more of a demanding and needs and things like that instead of the love that kind of went away. And the interesting thing is that both you and I came out of that with pure loving hearts. Where did we learn it from? Where did it come from? Where did yours come from, Kim?
Pain. And, I kind of go back to what something Anthony Robbins said: you're driven by pleasure or pain. And
Right.
I was so tired of the pain of it was really the pain of not knowing who I am and making such terrible choices in relationships because I so desperately wanted to feel I wanted someone to love me because I didn't
Absolutely.
yeah, I didn't know I could love me, and I didn't, I guess I was raised with in a faith. You can say God loves you, but you're just sitting there in this earth feeling so unloved. That was not tangible to me. And so, the journey of honestly, one of my favorite verses is James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, where he talks about trials are a
Yep.
joy because they
Correct.
produce
Yep.
in you perseverance, which actually make you whole and complete, not lacking anything. So I actually clung to that belief. So that belief, that verse, I turned it into a belief for me. And I started to be able to turn things around. But I would say also the spiritual leaders and teachers in my life that they taught me how to love myself. They did
Uh,
teach me.
I love that.
And probably because I'm a teacher type of coach myself, so
Absolutely.
teaching
Yeah.
really helps
Absolutely.
me. And you know, but it's so cool you brought up Mary Magdalene because I also had a vision with so I've had a vision with just Jesus. And then by the way, he gave me a really cool message. He took me to back when Moses stood in front of Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go."
Hmm.
And he basically said, like, I'm helping take people out of their self-imposed slavery.
Right.
So like I was kind of like Moses, let my people go from their self-imposed slavery. So that was really cool. But in another vision I had with Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and when I had this vision, I was feeling very defeated. And I had done a lot of spiritual work, but for some reason in this season, I was feeling very defeated and depressed. And this is kind of before I've done massive healing and became a coach, but um I know what it feels like to feel like you don't even have the strength to even get coaching, to even do anything. And in this vision, Mary Magdalene came in for me. She basically said, I'm stepping in for you the way Jesus stepped in for me.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And she held me.
Wow.
It was a very powerful vision. And I just laid there in her bosom, just letting her hold me in the vision. And so it was very healing. And to me, it was such a good message that, we can be so hard on ourselves.
Right.
And to know that, so one of my core beliefs, and we were basically saying is love, but it's no judgment.
Right.
So I don't judge you for where you are, what you're doing, what faith you're following, nothing. I do not judge you, or at least I make every effort not to. Become very natural for me not to judge anymore. I used to judge a lot, but not anymore. Like I just love and accept. And to me, I've seen how healing that is. So Jesus did that for us. He did that for Mary Magdalene, and Mary did that for me.
Right.
And so there's no judgment for where you are. I don't care what you've done
Right. Absolutely.
or what anyone has done to you. I just so strongly believe. So I have that belief. So if anything we're showing people today is that you can be really guided by your beliefs. And if you need help with, you know, creating beliefs that empower you rather than victimize you, that can pull you up and out. It's beliefs like that. Like that day, beliefs that, someone on the other side as beautiful as Mary Magdalene or God or an archangel can step in and help when we just don't feel like we've got it today.
Absolutely. You know, something beautiful about the Mary Magdalene thing was that I have a client that she channels Mary Magdalene.
Oh,
And in the middle of a session, she started channeling. And the first thing that Mary Magdalene said to me was, "You've never been loved the way you love." And she says, "I'm here to teach you how to love." And I'm like, whoa. And so she's like, reverse the feeling. When you give love out, feel it coming back. And that was one of the things that why I really got into Reiki was because to give a healing, you get a healing. So it's the same thing as you give love, you're receiving love. And it's that transference of energy. It's that energy that keeps changing and moving, and oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful concept. And Mary's the one that brought that to me, and she brought that in such a way that when she looked at me and and my client said that to me, my heart just melted. And I was more compassionate after that than I ever have been. I mean, I've never, I don't swear, I don't drink, I don't, different vices like that. I'm different. I've always been different in that aspect and everything. But I think as a male that gives love constantly and with no expectations, I don't fit in the same box as other people. And for somebody, the worst thing you could tell me is like, oh, you're like old men. I'm not like old men. You're not like old women. We're different. We're ever evolving, changing human beings. When we first started this conversation, we're different now. When we first met each other many years ago, we're different. We've changed different things. But what has always been is that there's that love in our heart that's never changed. Everything else changes, and that's that another part is that humans change constantly on the physical form, while spiritual changes constantly on the knowledge form and intuition form.
Mm.
And I love that fact that we are able to do that. And Mary Magdalene's the one that brought that out for me. And we're using names, okay? We're using different names as labels and everything else, but basically what it is consciousness love. And that's we talked about that earlier about
Yeah,
what
I love how
is
you equate the 2 because that
right.
people are like, like, what's tangible about conscious? To me, it's love. It's unconditional
Exactly.
love. Yeah.
Did that door behind you just open up?
It might be the cat.
The cat's still sitting there.
I have 2 cats.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
All right. So I did see that door move a little bit, and so I'm like, "Oh."
It might be
Ding, ding.
Milo. Yeah, let's see, I wanted to go back to yeah, so in light of this, so, you were talking about protection. So if there's healers out there listening to this, um, how do you protect yourself? And I remember, so again, it's a journey, right? And you hear lots of different things and people talk crystals and all these other things. I'm thinking, whatever works for you, but I know for me, like none of that stuff jived.
Nope, me
And
neither.
for me,
Right.
and um, I just kind of was like, "Well, I don't know." And 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 then I got a clear message that music. So for me,
That's interesting.
beautiful, positive music, and I have different playlists that I like that just really lift me out. And I do believe that, and again, this is my belief,
Right.
but negative entities can't really, what can they do when you're in a state of joy singing with beautiful music? Like, what can they do when and that's why I thought
We're in a
about,
state of bliss.
yeah, and the magic. So it truly is. I want to use the word magic, the magic of gratitude. So even if, let's say, you just start with a gratitude practice, again,
Right.
what you're doing, it's like you're building armor
Right. Exactly.
because they don't know what to do with gratitude.
Oh,
And, and whether they are even, I don't know whether they're even true or not. It could be a figment of your own egoic imagination, but whatever it is, doesn't really matter. To me, it's about, I've learned the art of being in my love space, being present, being in kind of being gratitude, being forgiveness, being understanding. It's once you kind of come over the hump and done a lot of the healing, I find it easier to be love than to not. Easier to be understanding
absolutely.
than to not. So I just know I have love protecting me. And I want to know what you think of this. I was hearing another healer talk the other day, and he talked about how healing just flows through him. It's a flowing.
Hmm.
And he basically, I love the quote. He said something about, I am a river of love. There's no end to it. It just flows.
Absolutely.
And I thought it's really true. When you
Absolutely.
know and believe, there's no end to it. It's infinite. It's
Right.
not like, well, I've given out as much love as I can give today. I can't give any more out. No, it's it's
Nope.
there.
Nope. It's the same thing of if you ask somebody what you deserve and put it into a thimble, right? And that's most people think is that all they deserve is what they can put into a thimble. But then you start thinking about what if the Big Dipper is your love? It holds that all that love in there. Imagine how big that is. It's infinite amount of love. And we can go diving into it. Love is manifestation, love is all this stuff. We can't even see the end of it. Okay. And it's like some of the lakes in Minnesota where you get in the middle of it, you can't see a shore or from anywhere. And that's what this love that we flow through is you can't see the end of it. You can never see the shoreline of it. It is forever and ever. And that I don't know if you remember the lady that quoted the stinking thinking, Louise Hayes. So Louise Hayes talked about stinking thinking, all right, but she also talks about how to get rid of stinking thinking, and she talks about putting it into an ocean and watching it go away. And the further it got away, the mind saying it's getting further and further away. That stinking thinking. Well, if we add it to that the ocean is full of love and
Mm.
takes our stinking thinking away from us, and that means that love is removed by the water. The stinking thinking is gone because the love of the water took it away from us. And since we're mostly water anyway, we're fluidly, we're controlled by a lot of fluids and water within our body, and that's an infinite amount of fluid that we have in us. Imagine us living 85 years, and constantly flushing and that water flowing. That's our love. That's our protection. That's a best way to get rid of the negativity within our body, the toxins or whatever else. That by the love of the water.
Yes, yes. It's awesome imagery.
Yes. Yeah.
So I kind of want to go back to the suicide thing and kind of maybe tackle that a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Okay.
Um, so another thing that I think is happening for me is, so in the last few years, I've noticed that I'm channeling people from the other side who've
Okay.
passed. And more specifically, I know for sure two people recently are working with me. I believe they're working with me who died of suicide. And the message I'm getting is, well, first off, they're in love now. They're in a space of love.
Right.
Do get the value of the human experience, okay? And so they want to help me help others stay here longer.
Right.
So again, you might not understand like why are we here fully, but just knowing that someone who did shorten their life wants to help
Right.
people stay. To me, there's value in that. And I like to look at it as, well, I must have wanted to be here. I'm here. Let's make the most of it. And it's
Right.
just a blip. Like, I do like how the Bible says, it's but a mist. Your life here is but a mist.
Yes.
Here
Absolutely.
today, gone tomorrow, like at least the earthly life. And so I figure, well, I'm going to do the best I can and try to tap into the specific, unique talents and gifts that I have in this particular recipe right here to give back love and service to the world. At least that's my mission here as a sensitive, as a light worker. And so there's a part of me that just feels really honored by these souls that are communicating with me, and I know orchestrating. I know maybe one of them is what dropped in my head, be free in 2023, cure mental illness. Like, I don't question that at all.
Right.
Um, and so we've got that. And if you want to talk about, your experience, if anybody speaks to you from the other side, but also I wanted to talk about what it's like for us who are spiritual leaders, teachers, healers, or whatever, when we're grieving. Like, we're still human and we still grieve. So I wanted to address that too.
That is, especially the holiday season right now. This is the first Christmas without my mother because she passed away this year, and it's the first time without two of my friends that were very close to me, and I'm grieving. And it's I go by, though, basically I really try to strive the five principles of Reiki. Just for today, do not anger. Just for today, do not worry. Just, all the different types of things that I try to strive for in this day and age. And that, but I never thought that, because I've lost so many people in my life, I've never thought that I would ever grieve as much as I do grieving my mother. And that's an interesting thing, is ever since I was a little kid, I've been able to see people pass away. And my first one was my grandma. I was 8 years old. I was snuggled in her arm. She sat up in the bed. She reached down, she pulled a cord, and she disappeared. And I'm 8 years old. I have no idea what just happened to my grandmother. Her body's still there, but I can't feel my grandma anymore. And I didn't know what had happened. And then my uncle was the next one. Like a couple years later, I'm 10 years old at his side of his bed, and he did the same thing. He sat up and pulled the cord, and he was gone. I've watched mostly every one of my family members that have ever passed away. I've been in the room with them when they passed away.
So you're saying they're physically, you still saw their body.
Their physical body and that, but I could
Did you
not
see
decide.
their spirit leave?
Yep. And that was,
God.
you know, I got up, and every time I watched that, I would get up and I'd open the windows up and never realized what I was doing. And it's funny is when it got to my father, when my father passed away, I was in the room with him. I was the only kid there in the room. My father did never liked me. So it was odd that I was in the room with him and helping him pass over, basically. And I opened the window up, and outside, and it's like midnight, and outside there's crows all over his front yard. And I opened that window up, and I said, "You are free now, Dad." And as soon as I did that, all the crows got up and flew away. So I've never understood it. So I finally found a guru that he talked me through it. Was that cord? It's the golden cord that we pull when we're done. The same cord that we have, that when we astral travel, when we travel, we don't get lost. We can always find our way home through that cord. It's that cord that is unplugged finally when our contract is up and it's over with. And it's an interesting concept, is that I know that they're in a better place. I can see them. My father has come back and talked to me. Other people have come back and talked to me after they passed over, and that, and I know they're in a better place. And so that doesn't discount the grieving part. Even though we know they're in a better place than that, is like, I know I won't see my mom until I am going to pull the cord. I won't see my dad, my uncles, my friends, best friends, and that. But it's interesting that on the other side, they're always happy. Now, I've had two near death experiences where I've passed away and come back. And each time I'm this great big eyeball, and I travel through until I get to this plain, and it's just full of grass. It's, the South Dakota plains are just full of grass and everything else. And that's what it looks like to me. And all my relatives are there. And when I get closer to them, they're going, "Go back, go back. It's not your time. It's not your time." And I'm like, okay, but I don't feel no pain. I feel good now and everything else. And then all of a sudden I start feeling my eyeball getting turned around and being sucked back into the room. And I actually, the last time I sat up and I go, "Oh, I'm back." And the nurse who had the jumper sticks, that she was going to start pounding on me, she goes, "What do you mean, ooh, I'm back?" And I'm like, I said, "I wanted to stay this time." And she says, "It wasn't my time." And I said, "Yeah, I agree with that." But it's this whole feeling is that we know that there's something better on the other side, but that doesn't stop the human part of us from grieving. Our physical part knows, our spiritual part knows, our physical part has no idea what happens to us. And there's a part of us that just has a hard time believing that there's another world out there for us afterwards.
Yeah, and I guess my belief about, I signed up for this experience, I'm gonna take it all. So
Absolutely.
even the grieving, so I do honor the human experience of it. Like, yes, I'm human, but I have my spirit with me here, spirit and
Absolutely.
body. But if I want to grieve and cry, I grieve and cry.
Absolutely.
And I
That's
guess,
not a bad thing.
yeah,
That's,
no,
that's
tears are
not a bad thing.
wonderful. I would say tears are our most perfect natural healer.
Right.
I mean,
And
we're even built with this
yes.
natural healing mechanism.
Yep. I'm
Amazing.
I'm I'm 6'2", 250 pounds, and when my father always called me a big crybaby because I've always been a sensitive person, and to this day I cry. I mean, I still can't watch old Yeller anymore. I mean, I can't. There's shows I can't watch because I cry too easy, and I'm very sensitive in that aspect. But it's the thing is that I didn't become that way. I've always been that way. And sensitive people, as they grew up differently than other people, and that especially in the Midwest area, like you and I grew up in that. I grew up as a Lutheran, okay, and Lutheran was a very, I mean, it's prestigious, their belief system, no dancing, no blah 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 blah. They're very strict in a lot of ways, but yet again, there was a lot of good teachings that came out of being a Lutheran. But being the Midwest person that's sensitive, growing up on a farm around animals and everything else, and that it's really tough. I back
Speaking my story right now.
I'm making your story up right now.
You're speaking my story, the animals
Absolutely,
on the farm as a sensitive.
absolutely. And it was, I would always go out when I feed the animals that, and I would talk to them like they could hear me and I could feel them. And slaughter day when we had to slaughter animals for dinner or whatever else, and that it was the hardest thing in the world for me. I couldn't, I to this day I can't do it. I could never go back. I mean, I even was at the point where to make extra money because in the Midwest wasn't always a lot of money. I became a guide to help people in hunting guide in the and no, can't do that anymore. Um, People have no, I would always give thanks to the animals that we killed, and we used every part of the animal. I always believed that the animal gave us an opportunity to eat and everything else. But when they kill for a trophy, I can't do that. I can't be part of that either. Everything it's
No, and not, it's funny you were mentioning this. My son is 20, so he's, making his way.
what are you, 5 when you had him?
And he tells me he's buying the cheap meat. And I said, wait a minute, you're not eating. So I'm vegan, but I go, you're not eating organic. He goes, Mom, it's too expensive. I said, no. Mm-mm. So for Christmas, I'm going to buy him subscriptions to get meat delivered to him from Good Ranchers, which
Right.
is organic. They're good to the animals. I said to Riley, I go, you do not want to be eating meat from animals that are not being treated fairly nicely, animals shot up with hormones. Um, I go, I just don't want that for you, and I don't mind flipping the bill for you at this time.
Oh,
To kind of instill that in him. Yeah,
right.
no. Woo! But yeah, on the farm. So I wanted to ask you, I had to hide my tears and just shut up and get out there. And, so I've clearly worked through that. But the beauty of these stories is, I've made my trial into a triumph, and I'm able to share with people how I found my way. And I am grateful to the animals. I've thanked them, for their gift to me and even my story. Because
Right.
the thing about my story is I can really relate and empathize to anyone who's experiencing trials and struggles because I had them too. So I was curious with your story, were you heard? Were you seen? Was your sadness seen?
No, it's you had to hide all that, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I was probably beaten more for my emotions than anything else, you know. And I grew my kids differently. Is that, one smack on the butt was for what they did wrong, and it couldn't be wasn't hard. Two was because it made me feel better. Three, because I was angry, and I never wanted to hit out of anger ever. And I grew up with that as being hit out of anger and emotions. And I have three beautiful children that are very emotional. One's a doctor, and another one's a neurologist, and another one's a comedian. So I mean, I have a large a variety of beautiful children that they come up with all these beautiful things, and I never wanted to ever stop them with that. And it's the same thing with my grandkids now. I have five beautiful grandkids that see things. And
Mm.
my kids will never stop them from seeing these things. They promote it. They allow them to be able to see things. So my upbringing of everything I didn't want to be is what I was taught as a young kid was everything I didn't want to be. And this is when back goes back to where did we learn this? We learned it by hate, anger, pain, like you said. And we changed it into our version of love. The only way we can think of how to be love was by changing it to our version of love. And that's not wrong. Nobody says that our love is wrong. I mean, a lot of people don't believe in our love because they think that we are expecting something, but we're not. Our love is pure, unconditional, just being love. And I love that. I do have a client coming up here, so we're going to have to kind of like cut this short. Let's do this again, though. All right.
Yeah, no, I knew we'd just flow and have fun,
I
but yeah,
know. I
I
do that
think
too.
hopefully it blesses whoever needs to hear it out there. It blessed me, so thank
That's
you.
me too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.